About 5 weeks ago or so, in my review of the BQ Aquaris X Pro, I mentioned two things that I want to dive a little bit deeper in here again today in my review of the BQ Aquaris X. The first thing was that I thought that the performance and also camera performance definitely would have needed some more optimization, and I hoped for that to come in the near future. The second thing was that I thought that the actually more affordable Aquaris X that makes a few compromises in terms of build quality and also specs could actually be the better phone, especially in terms of value. And that's exactly what I'm going to cover here today in the review. So let's start off with the first thing, the design and build quality. And yes, I mentioned already some compromise in terms of build quality, which here in the case would be that the back here is plastic, but it is high quality plastic and it feels very solid, and it's actually also quite grippy. So if someone makes a phone out of plastic, make it like this and I won't complain at all, and I will easily give it a great build quality because the overall phone still feels super sturdy. I guess the sides would still be metal. I'm not quite 100% sure, so don't quote me on that, but I couldn't really find any information and it feels more like metal. If not, then it's extremely high quality plastic. Same as for the buttons, because as you can hear, some nice audible and also tactile feedback. I like that. I also like the curves on the back. What I've already said though in the Aquaris X Pro review, that I don't like the sides going a little bit wider towards the back because that makes the phone feel a little bit wider than it actually would feel, especially if we would turn it around. So one-hand usability though is still fine. And when I complained about the X Pro, you have to see this as an almost $400 phone, where this is about a little less than $300. So here I'm okay with it not being super compact, but otherwise it feels really nice in the hand, especially this really nice plastic. The fingerprint reader, I have to say, is totally reliable and it's good. I still think that the whole screen turn on animation is a tad longer than on some other phones, but I don't really have a complaint. But usually if I just pull it out of my pocket, no problems here. Of course we can see the LEDs and the camera. Then we can see the headphone jack and the microphone, SD card and SIM card tray on the left. On the bottom we can see USB Type-C, the speaker on the right and the mic on the left. The buttons that I already mentioned, in my opinion, are placed just about right and nothing else to say here. We have a notification LED, we have capacitive buttons, a little bit different design here, especially with the home button, but those work fine. Unfortunately though, there is no option to switch the button layout, but that is what it is. On the front we can see that it's pretty much flat, but there is a nice smooth transition towards the sides, with those being curved as well, just a little bit with an angle. So let's get into the next thing, the display. Unfortunately, not really any options in terms of changing the display saturation or brightness, or the calibration, because the display on its own, with about 700 lux, which is for some reason 50 lux less than I've reviewed on the X Pro, even though I think it is the same display, is still super bright. The viewing angles are stable and the calibration out of the box is still very nice, but also again, as on the X Pro, there is a little bit of a red tint visible in brighter situations. It actually didn't bother me so much on this one, so it felt a little bit less, so maybe it's a little bit of some hit and miss whatever version you get in terms of your phone's display, but otherwise still a lovely display. But for some reason, if I had it side by side with something like the Honor 9, that of course costs a little bit more, it felt a little bit clearer, a little bit sharper, even though we have the same resolution here. But still, I would say it's a really good to almost very good display. What about the speaker? Yep, I will give the speaker definitely easily a quite good, because it is quite loud, and the overall tonal balance is really nice because it doesn't sound thin, it doesn't sound overly warm, but they're definitely nicely balanced, so I'm fully pleased with that, quite good as well. Actually, the headphone jack, this time I will give it a really good, maybe a quite good, which is better than the okay that I gave it on the X Pro. So maybe they changed a few things in the software with some optimization, or my perception changed a little bit, but now I'm definitely actually pleased. Now, the performance. Let's end all apps and check how quickly they start, and pretty much you won't see any difference compared to what we have seen already on the Aquaris X Pro, because it's still using the 626 and it is still not there in terms of optimization that I would have liked to have seen it, which is odd because I thought over time it definitely would have happened. 5 weeks would have definitely been enough, because browsing, as you can see, is totally fine, but this phone just doesn't feel as smooth and not as consistent as the slightly better optimized 625 phones, which is a little bit odd because the SoC should actually be better. But especially if I go into Flamingo and once it syncs, every other phone can still maintain a quite good experience. But here you see, especially if you launch an app the first time and don't give it quite the time yet to properly cache everything, it is actually quite a laggy experience. So this is why I won't give the performance a very good that the SoC on its own definitely should get, but just a really good to maybe very good, because if it works out, yes, it's fine. But too many instances, especially if you get new into an app, it's fine. Of course, with the 3 GB RAM in comparison to the 4 GB of the X Pro, multitasking is a little bit less, but I still think that 3 gigs are more than enough. So performance on its own is absolutely fine, especially in the browser and so on. But you have to just consider that it's not always quite up there yet once you launch the app, so that's a minor thing. Otherwise, gaming performance is really nice. That's maybe ever so slightly ahead of the 625, but just a little bit. You get nice high frame rates, pretty much no frame drops at all, and I'm still every time impressed and surprised of how good of a gaming experience the 626 can deliver. It also doesn't really get warm, which is nice, so you can play for hours and hours, even more demanding games with, I would say, absolutely moderate frame rates and just a consistent, really nice experience. Now, battery. A full charge takes pretty much the same as on the X Pro, since it is the same battery and pretty much the rest is very similar, 1 hour and 35. Also, YouTube is pretty much the same. Now, getting back to the battery life, that one was about half an hour weaker. But I don't think there's an actual difference. I just think that since my mobile internet provider changed the carrier, I think I took a little bit of a hit, and that will be maybe visible in the future reviews, and that's something that I have to figure out, because it was very similar, and especially on Wi-Fi you still can get like the 9 hours around that, and still 5.5 to 6 hours, which is still top. And back then on the Aquaris X Pro I gave it a fantastic battery life. Now I'm paddling back a little bit to great plus, just because I've got so many phones that have these great battery lives anymore that this doesn't quite turn out anymore, and I just can't quite fully judge my carrier change just yet. But still, especially on Wi-Fi, standby drain is not a thing at all. On mobile data though, this phone is closer to many flagships than on Wi-Fi, because the difference here is way bigger, as what you can see, maybe like 5.5 to 6 to 9 hours. The difference is way bigger than on some other phones, like especially HTC, where there is a difference between mobile data and Wi-Fi of about 1 hour. So, next thing, once it unlocks the software, as you can here see the stock launcher with an app drawer, and this is pretty much stock Android. As you can see from the layout, they did pretty much no changes at all, which is actually a little bit sad. I would have actually wished for some few ones. You get gestures, for example, to jump to the camera, lift to check the phone, and you get quite a nice camera UI, which I won't go any further, but that's pretty much it. Which is already, as you can see here though, one of the benefits. Since this phone is running stock Android, you will pretty much always, from what I've heard, get the newest updates very fast, since we are running 7.1.1 here already. Update should be fast, but one thing that I'm not quite sure yet, if we get all the updates really fast, why doesn't software optimization happen just as fast as well? Because the performance, I still think, should actually be better than what it is. But getting to the camera, and in case you have wondered, is it worth it jumping to the X Pro over the X if you want the better cam? I would say no, not necessary, because as you can see here, especially selfies look just as good. And even though I said they're almost great and now just very good, it is the case that still the camera can produce, as you can see, some high quality detailed shots. Nice actually exposure, even indoors. Maybe not always there, but there you have to keep a little bit of a shake-free hand, because as you can see, sometimes it's more blurry. But as you can see here, in many instances, it absolutely still can deliver. As you can see, not always, but if, then really good. And what I did actually this time, what I usually don't do, is check also the camera without the flash, because this one has a flash front. As you can see, this is without, and this is with the flash. Definitely looks nice, absolutely. As you can see here once again. Now, the video, this is where I'm just giving it maybe a really good, because it could be a little bit better. It feels a little bit over contrasty, also some artifacting going on. And yeah, even though we have image stabilization on the back cam, I don't think it's here on the front cam, because it's an option, stabilizer, and I'll get to that actually in a few more seconds. But video quality is absolutely fine, and the microphone sound is good as well. Now, low light, this was taken about at 6 AM, so quite early still. It was actually quite bright already for that time, but as you can see here, for not that much light, quality is really nice. But once we get indoors with even less light, there the camera falls off, especially in terms of white balance, which is something that I don't get because, as you can see here, super cold pictures. They don't really fall apart, but everything then is just too contrasty and too dark, and you lose quite some details. Now outdoors, I would then again give it pretty much the same as on the X, because on the X Pro, because the X Pro has the better low light cam, but outdoors they're pretty much on par again. I don't really notice a difference because this one has actually 16 megapixels instead of 12, but therefore the aperture is 2.0 instead of 1.8 on the X Pro. But still, as you can see, you're not always perfect, super close, but that was a little bit of a miss. But otherwise, as you can see here, nice, detailed, sharp. Colors look very nice. What I've noticed though, and this is something that you will see here, that sometimes the exposure is just a little bit too flaky. It's just a little bit too extreme, as you can see here once again. It is a little bit sometimes too harsh. This is actually with HDR, and I definitely think HDR makes a nice picture, because this would be with HDR and this without. So it definitely improves the picture if you want that. Now, here is the thing about the stabilization, because I've tried it. This is early on, so don't really bother so much about the quality, but it's about the stabilization. As you can see, it's quite shake-free, but it also never really seems smooth. It feels a little bit choppy, which is a general issue of this cam. Now, without the stabilization, you can see it's a little bit smoother, but still a little bit choppy, but of course way more shaky. So just keep that in mind. The stabilization works nice, but still there is something wrong in terms of optimization of it producing smooth videos. Because if you can see this now, this is 4K with stabilization on. You see quite some artifacting and you see quite some choppiness, and even more so pretty much almost unacceptable on the viewfinder, because you get like maybe 3 frames or so per second, so it's very hard to see what you're actually filming on the viewfinder, even though, as you can see, the quality is nice. The autofocus works quite fast, reliable and smooth, and video would have been quite nice shake-free, as you can see here, but it's just weirdly choppy. It doesn't feel like 25 or even 30 frames at all. Once you move it less, you can see the quality on its own could be very good without an issue, because I think at 4K especially the autofocus works really nice. Now the same thing without stabilization. Smoother, noticeably, but still some choppiness is there that I just can't understand. It's not so much there again on the viewfinder, and autofocus works nice. Some artifacting is still going on, and if you try to do the same on 1080p 60 with stabilization, here, viewfinder gets noticeably better, but still a little bit choppy, but the video, as you can see, is noticeably less sharp. So I'm not quite sure if that's worth it. So I would still stick with 4K just without stabilization, because I could show you now the same without stabilization, but that really won't make such a big change as it does on 4K. So the camera is not quite there yet. It still needs optimization, especially with the weird choppiness that I don't understand, especially about more than 5 weeks after I've reviewed the X Pro, and even more so longer after the release of this phone. I'm not quite sure if this is okay, because otherwise, especially for pictures on its own, the camera is definitely well worth it in this price range. Now let's get to the pros and cons, and as you can see, quite a lot there, because great design and build, and especially since we have this high quality plastic that is also very grippy. We have a reliable, even though not the fastest, fingerprint reader. We have a super bright display, but it's just maybe really too very good because of the slight little red tint and not being crazy sharp. Then a quite good speaker, also quite loud, quite good headphone jack, a really very good performance. Like I said, it needs a little bit more work, I think. Great plus battery life, which is still one of the biggest advantages. Stock Android with fast updates, Galileo satellite support, which I didn't really get into because I'm pretty sure others did that, and that's something that I usually don't cover anyways. Then a very good front-facing cam, a quite good front-facing video cam. Okay, low light cam, very good main cam, and potentially at least a very, if not at least, good video cam. Now, on the negative sides, it could be slightly more compact, but that's in brackets in consideration to the X Pro, because that one was way more expensive. So this, I can't really blame it in terms, because it still feels great in the hand. Visible red tint in brighter situations on the display. Performance, I still think should be better as is. The exposure is slightly wonky, camera performance is still quirky, and choppy video footage at times. Which obviously now leads me to the conclusion. Priced at around $280, it still sometimes is actually noticeably cheaper on sales, which I didn't see yet so much as, for example, on the X5. But I guess this will quite soon on sale to be like $250, and even under $280, I can actually still recommend it, because you should just take into consideration, especially now with the overall high qualities of the hardware on its own. It definitely is along the other competitors that are, for example, reviewed in my best phones that are around $300 at 5.2 inches, like for example a Moto G5 Plus, also an Honor 8 and so on, and it is on that level. But it could actually surpass many of them if they would bring the performance to where it could be, where it should be, and the same goes for the camera. If the camera is not important for you, then it's even easier to recommend it. But if it is, you still should maybe wait a little bit longer. And like I said already, bringing back to my initial intro, optimization, yes, still needed, even though I expected it to be happened already now, so I don't think the X Pro has happened it well. And now, is this worth it, or is this better than the X Pro? I would say, especially in terms of values, yes, because just take the differences here. Yes, we lose out on half of the storage, if not even a quarter, because there is a 128GB and 64GB version on the X Pro where we only have 32, which in my opinion is still good enough. 3GB of RAM compared to 4 is not an issue for me, because 3 is still good enough. Therefore, though, you get the plastic back, which doesn't feel any less premium compared to the glass. Yes, the glass has definitely some nice feel to it, but this actually feels just about as premium, as sturdy, and is just about as grippy. So not really any compromise in terms of that. Display is the same, speaker is the same, performance is the same, battery life is the same, and the camera, if you thought would be a bigger issue to be not considered as just about as good, I would say no. The only thing where the X Pro is better in terms of the camera is low light, but anywhere else the camera on the front is I think the exact same one, and the main camera's quality is due to having 60 megapixels here with just a little bit less of an aperture of 2.0 instead of 1.8. I don't think will be a visible difference, so that's where I'm gonna leave it. I don't sound too impressed just because the one important thing for me, the performance, is not quite where I expected it to be. Otherwise, once they would actually find it fixes, they can get back to me. I will give it a revisit, a review, and then, or if that's not something really important for you, because like I said, the performance is just not always quite lag-free until you spend a little bit time in the app, and it's not always that important. I see this difference as just more being a reviewer. So keep that in mind, maybe check it in store if you can, and then decide on your own. I hope I gave you enough information to help you. Otherwise, I would say you can leave me down there in the comments if you want to know something else, or just tell me your opinion. Maybe a thumbs up and a subscription. Otherwise, have a nice day. Bye.